Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. So as Dan mentioned, I'm going to be drawing a little bit on this, some of the studies we've done in the past few years, looking across jurisdictions in the tropics that have taken on a commitment to pursue jurisdictional programs. So the first study, this is part of a larger collaboration with C4 and the Governor's Climate and Forest Task Force, came out a couple of years ago, and we plan on updating it next year. The other study I'll be drawing on is an analysis we did of progress that jurisdictions have made towards meeting their Rio Branco Declaration commitments. And this is work I've done, especially in collaboration with my colleague Juan Ardila and many other colleagues and partners. So here we'll be focusing on 37 jurisdictions that contain 28% of the world's tropical forests. Most of them were also included in our analysis of the Rio Branco Declaration, not all. Some of the key statistics to know here is that the 37 jurisdictions, 24 of them have reduced deforestation relative to their FREL, their forest reference emission level, which we have defined either based on the actual subnational FREL that's been assigned or based on the national FREL that was available to us. They have achieved 8 billion tons of CO2 equivalent in avoided emissions through that reduction. 35 of the 37 jurisdictions have taken on formal commitments under either the Rio Branco Declaration, the Under 2 MOU, or the New York Declaration on Forests. And 24 out of 37 of these jurisdictions have started or have begun designing and implementing really jurisdiction-wide strategies that are in at least intermediate or advanced stages of development. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So first, I just wanted to start by showing the deforestation trend across these 37 jurisdictions. That should say jurisdictions, not provinces. As you can see, there was a big increase up until 2005, and then a steady decrease down to 2019. Of course, most of this is explained by what's been happening in Brazil. There's been increasing deforestation in Brazil in the last few years, and Monica will talk a little bit more about that. But you know, what's interesting here is that across the board, there is some movement in the right direction, as Dan mentioned, and maybe some of this decrease being explained by Indonesian provinces. One thing that we did is to look at progress towards jurisdictional sustainability on 9 elements, which are listed on the left side of the slide here. What we found is that those elements that are maybe most advanced, or sort of where jurisdictions are moving into intermediate stages with those, are the low emission rural development strategies and the multi-stakeholder processes. So those are definitely in different stages of development, but it's also promising to see that they are making progress on those things. And I expect that when we do an update of the assessment next year, that we'll find that more jurisdictions have actually moved into this intermediate or advanced category with their integrated strategies, jurisdiction-wide strategies, in part because there's been emphasis from Norwegian and other funding to Governor's Climate and Forest Task Force members to develop those strategies and start implementing them. Where we saw sort of the least advancement, or at least advances, is in the monitoring, reporting, and verification, and on LEDAR finance. And we'll talk more about the LEDAR finance later. We've also done some studies led by my colleague Maria Di Giano on progress that jurisdictions have made regarding Indigenous peoples and local communities. So just diving a little bit into this case study of the Rio Branco Declaration. It was launched in 2014, initially signed by 13 members of the Governor's Climate and Forest Task Force. That number increased to 38 by 2018. It was a precondition for receiving funds that were pledged by Norway by 2018. So what it asked for, basically, what the government said is that they would reduce deforestation in their jurisdictions by 80% by 2020 if they received support from donor governments and private sector to help them with capacity building and pay for performance funds. And so when we looked at whether those signatories would meet the target in 30 of the jurisdictions that I presented earlier, we found that half of the study jurisdictions had at least made some progress. 4 of them were likely to achieve the 80% reduction by the end of 2020. The majority had at least one deforestation reduction target formally incorporated into their legal policy framework, but only 2 of those targets were equally or more ambitious. The reasons underlying the progress or lack of progress really vary and depend on things like national context, timing in terms of when the agreement was actually signed, when they actually started undertaking their jurisdictional progress, political turnover, deforestation history, all kinds of things like that. And when we look at the question of how much finance the jurisdictions actually received in response to their request, we found there was only one direct response, and that was from Norway to the GCF task force members. This increased the number of jurisdictions receiving funding pledges, but overall funds really didn't increase. So while we saw that 9 jurisdictions initially had funding, 30 had it in the period after the Rio Branco Declaration was signed. What this means is that more jurisdictions received at least a small incentive to reduce deforestation or to at least implement their programs, but all received probably far less than necessary. And we also found that there was very little performance-based finance, and Monica de los Rios will talk more about that. Only 2 states received that, Mato Grosso and Acre. So what's really missing still, we find, is that we need greater and more sustained and more creative support for jurisdictions. These are systemic changes that they're trying to undertake, and those need time and they need support across political cycles. And that's particularly important. I think this is something that Patricia has definitely seen with San Martin and other jurisdictions in Peru, who are able to maintain progress on their jurisdictional programs across different political administrations with support. We also need urgent support for jurisdictions with high remaining forest and historically low but rising deforestation. That's still an area that's there's no solution for, including in the current voluntary programs like Art Trees and the Tropical Forest Standard. And we also need more support and recognition at all levels of progress, from early to advanced. So not just providing support to those jurisdictions that may have the most advanced programs or elements of their jurisdictional programs, but also those who are really just getting started, because they'll need some sort of indication that there's interest in them continuing. And that's it for me today. There's obviously a lot that wasn't covered here, but I encourage you to look at those studies, and also I'm happy to take questions at the end. Thank you.